Next up, we'll talk briefly about typography in Bootstrap. So actually this is not under components. These are all standalone, components, things like, making a button or making a nav bar or a carousel, an image gallery. I'm going to go to Content, Typography, and this is where we'll begin. So this tells us a bit about some of the global changes that have been made, the font that has been changed, the global font size that's been defined, the background color, all the stuff that we see, just the fact that, this font has changed. This is different than our typical font. But if we keep scrolling down, there are a couple things I want to call your attention to. First of all, these display classes. So these display classes, there's only 4 of them, display-1, 2, 3, and 4, are used to make large headers. It says when you need a heading to stand out, consider using a display heading, a larger, slightly more opinionated heading size. Keep in mind they are not responsive by default, but you can change that. Okay, so let's try using one of them. Just class equals display-1, and that makes sense to use on an H1. So instead of saying placeholder, let's do something like display1 on an H1 with the inner text of Bootstrap playground maybe. Okay, and then let's add some other ones. So let's do an H2 for our buttons, and that's a normal H2. Or I can do, display 1, 2, 3, or 4. Now these are just different sizes here, so that they don't have to indicate meaning. Like, an H2 should be a subheader of an H1. It should be the second level of headings. But if we're just using a class with display of 2 or 3, let's do 4 though. We don't have to have a display 2 and a display 3 like we would with H1s and different headings. Okay, so we've got different sections. I'm now going to make another one. So I'm just going to do an H2 with a class of display-2. Actually, I want 4 for typography stuff. So there's our buttons. Here's typography. Okay, so aside from what we just saw there, another thing is the lead class. It actually really does not do a lot. They say it makes a paragraph stand out. If you add the class of lead, let's see what happens. So here's our paragraph. I'm going to add class of lead. Watch this right here. I'm going to refresh. I think it just gets a little bit larger, honestly. We can inspect and figure it out. I don't want to waste too much time, but let's see. Yeah, it changes the font size, and it changes the font weight. Okay, that's it. Not a huge deal, but I guess it does stand out. So that's supposed to be for like a tagline, I guess, or the lead text of a page. Other than that, I want to show you block quotes. So block quotes are an element in HTML. We can just make a block quote. So let's do that right here, block quote. Inside of there, we'll do a paragraph. I'm just going to do lorem for my block quote. Okay, so that's what it looks like. But then I can give it a class of block quote. And this is coming from CSS. So this is supposed to be, just in general, if we haven't covered the block quote element or you haven't seen it, it's supposed to represent some quotation, right? That goes on its own line usually. So I'll refresh, and it gets a little bit, heavier, bolder, and slightly larger maybe. But then what's cool is that we actually have an easy way of adding in a footer, a bit of a source. It just is a class of block quote dash footer. So let's do that right there. They use a footer element for semantics. You could use anything, but I'm going to do what they do in the docs. So block quote dash footer. And then let's see, someone famous in blah, blah, blah. Let's just do, let's say this is coming from Mr. Lorem. Is it Ipsum? Yes, it's right there. I don't know why I needed to ask. Okay, so let's see what that does for us. Ooh, check it out. It's grayed out. And it gives us this little dashy hyphen thing, the horizontal line, and we didn't have to do anything, right? We didn't create that. I didn't tell it to be gray. That's just the default styles. Now you might be noticing this here, MB0. We can put that in here. We haven't covered it yet. This is an easy way of adding margin on the bottom, or actually in this case, removing it and setting it to 0. Watch what happens. That margin on the paragraph on the bottom disappears. And now this is right, almost touching it. Okay, so not that often that you really need a block quote, but it's cool that we have that option. Next, we have these different utilities, different ways of aligning text. So if I want something to be centered, it's very easy. Just add text-center. If I want it right aligned, text-right. So let's do that on the entire block quote, text-right. Refresh. And there we go. Now I could easily achieve that through my own CSS, right? It's nothing revolutionary. Let's make my H1 right here centered as well. So there it is, text-center. It's just a class that I'm adding on just to make my life easier. But obviously we could do that on our own, just like we could do any of this stuff on our own. We could make something gray. We could set margin bottom to 0. But the idea of Bootstrap is to make it faster and easier for us to get those styles. Next up, I'm going to go to utilities right here. And we're going to spend more time talking about utilities in a little bit, but I'm going to go to colors. So these are all things that, well, they're utilities. They help us quickly center something or change the color or add a border or change its display property or position attribute, or position property rather, or add a shadow. They're not necessarily components. They don't stand alone. We add them onto something. And we're going to start with color. So we have a lot of different classes to change the color of text, text-, and then any of the semantic color names we've seen. So if I want to make something, I don't know, I like the info color, I can do text-info, or primary, I can do text-primary. So I'm going to do that for my H1 right there, text-primary. And refresh, and now we get our primary color there, which happens to be the default blue. We have all the other ones, right? Text, success, danger, warning, info. Hopefully that's self-explanatory. We also have the option to do background colors. So I can use BG- any of them. So BG- primary, BG- secondary, BG- danger. And then often we'll use a light text on top. That's just text- white. So let's make something have a background here. It's not going to be particularly pretty. Why don't we do, what's our block quote going to look like if I give it a background color? Let's see. So I'm going to just give the whole thing a BG. How about light? That's a color. Can you see that there? It might not show up on the screencast very well. It's a very light gray. Let's do something different then. How about BG- info? Oh, hideous. But it is a background color. I guess I'll leave it at that. Nothing's going to look very good with the background color right now, but we easily can add them, and we can mix and match. So I could give something a dark background color and light text, or hopefully not, but I could give something, danger background color and warning text, and I guess it would look like a McDonald's logo, red and yellow. All right, so those are some utilities, color utilities, background color. You can use those to change text and change the background color of anything. And I think I'll stop this video here. So we learned a decent amount around certain text utilities, text alignment. We saw the display classes, block quote, honestly, not a huge deal. And then all the text utilities for color.